Assalamu alaikum. Today we're here with Ms. Aisha Malik, who is a faculty member at the Faculty of Aerospace and Strategic Studies at Air University. I'm Aiz Azam, also faculty member at FASS Air University. The topic of our discussion today is going to be on epistemes and indigenizing epistemes. Traditionally, when we think of these words or when we hear this phrase, it can generally be considered as something difficult to understand. Typically, people who are not part of the field of international relations would struggle, even those who are within the field, they would struggle to understand this because it's not generally considered part of common discourse or common narratives. So the objective of today's session here with Ms. Aisha is to discuss what epistemes are, what do we mean by indigenizing them, and just generally try to gain an understanding of the concept. So welcome Ms. Aisha Malik, thank you for joining us. Let's just begin with the basics. What are epistemes? What do we understand what the word episteme means in the context of international relations as an academic discipline?
Thanks so much, Isaac. So, epistemes basically is, of course, not a very formal, it's a very formal term, and it's not casually used in our everyday discussions. So that's why there is a sufficient alienation with the concept and with the terminology as well. So whenever it appears, there is a very natural thought which goes along that maybe it's something of philosophy or ontology and epistemology. And many of the times when I coin these terms in the classroom environment, so students say that this is maybe a biological term. So that's how uncommon the terminology is. But epistemes are all those invisible but yet certain streams of knowledge which exist in the larger discourse, which are not highlighted as something which is prominent, but they have a very dominant implication. What does this mean? This means that there are these everyday discussions in which we are constructing narratives. So when those narratives take a posture into policy making, it becomes a prominent episteme, just as colonialism had a prominent and dominant episteme. It was very invisible because it was operating, it was manifesting in everyday life, but it constructed certain knowledge and then it repeated itself. So episteme is that certain stream of knowledge which is invisible in everyday life, but it is constructing that larger discourse which is organizing the everyday life.
So if I were to put it, for instance, in layman's terms, it basically means knowledge which is learned over time, constructed over time, and then it gets reiterated or reinforced at every level because it is considered as the larger truth. Would that be a way to put it?
Okay, truth is actually another attribute of such episteme, because truth is something which makes an episteme the episteme, and there is required a certain justification for that truth. So as long as in any society, be it a traditional or a modern society, any truth is justified, it becomes the episteme. So justification is another process which the episteme has to go through to prove itself an episteme. But then again, there is a process of repetition and reiteration and reproduction involved in this knowledge stream. So yes.
Could we, for instance, just to help us and to also help our audience contextualize it a little better, would you be able to give us an example of something that we might consider an episteme?
Yeah. So when it was colonial period, as I said earlier, so when it was colonial period and there were all these policies, and the policies had an impact on everyday life naturally. So everyday life was in transition, and in that transitory phase, whatever people were talking about, it became a dominant narrative. So it was quite invisible, but that's a very laymanish understanding of it. If we go to a theoretician like Michel Foucault, he says that epistemes exist and every time has its own episteme, and it is made of the dominant knowledge structures of that time. What does this mean? For instance, after modernity, the episteme of the epoch was scientific, right? And then rational. So what would be the episteme of our times, the contemporary epoch, if we try to rationalize it? What would be the episteme of our times? I think it would be more of AI driven. It would be more of data driven. It is scientific, it is rational, but then there are tools which are implicating it in some other manner. So episteme of this time has to be calculated through the prominent or the dominant knowledge structures which are scientific and rational, and then data driven, and then AI driven. So whatever we say has an impact, and it kind of drops into the larger pool of knowledge which becomes episteme.
So when we talk about within the South Asian, within any regional context, so for us it would be the South Asian context. When we talk about indigenizing epistemes, we recently you held a very successful conference here at FASS on that as well. So what do we understand by indigenizing epistemes? What does it involve?
Yeah, so when we were going through this brainstorming session on the conference, so we were thinking that whether we are going to have a word, a term of local, or is it going to be an indigenous, right? So there is sufficient difference between local and indigenous. Indigenous is more appropriate in the term that we were trying to contest an outsider episteme, an outsider knowledge, and we are trying to contest an insider or interior or inner based episteme against that outsider. So indigenous was a more appropriate term. Why? Because indigenous is something which is culmination of all of your cultural aspects. Whatever you are doing in your social, your cultural, your economic and your political domain, it is very indigenous. It had to be indigenous, it was indigenous, although it has mutations. Now, why? Because it is interacting with a lot of forces like globalization, like postmodernity, like AI, again. So there are mutations, but indigenous is something which is happening here, which was born here. Maybe it has mutations. So that's why we chose the word indigenous episteme. So, yeah.
So would it be fair to say, for example, if I were to put it in another way, that when we talk about indigenizing epistemes, essentially we're saying that rather than using the knowledge, or rather than using as a base the knowledge which we have acquired or which has been given to us or even pushed on us from different sources which are not native to us, let's say the West, when we talk about IR as an academic discipline. So rather than going for those, we essentially try to create a thought process or try to create a narrative which is based on our identity and our particular context, our experiences, our shared history. So that is what it would mean to
indigenize absolutely, epistemes. Absolutely. When I said social domain, it is exactly what I meant, because in social domain, in the social setting, the culture exists and it manifests itself. So I think indigenous episteme comes essentially from your cultural discourses, and your culture is also subject to mutation, which of course changes with a lot of forces when intersections of different forces happen.
So then I think my next question would be, can epistemes be challenged, or rather how difficult is it to challenge epistemes?
Yeah, it's a very gigantic task to contest an existing episteme and then also replace it with something which you're looking for. So when we look at, again, when we look at the period of British rule in the subcontinent, we see that how much time did it take? It took 2.5 or 3 centuries to transition that episteme, to exchange that, to swap that episteme from a very traditional base to a foreign base. So it takes time, it's a very slow process, but I think the forces which are at play are 100% political. The episteme has to follow from the political domain, but at a similar time, it has to be a top-down and a bottom-up approach.
So it has to be, essentially then that would mean, when we look at it also in terms of strategic narrative, it is something which has to come down from the top, but then it also has to have that kind of reception or acceptability from the bottom-up level in order for it to be successful. So if we think of it in terms of, if we date back to the time from when international relations as an academic discipline emerged, so the interwar period, since then, have we seen any kind of challenge within the South Asian region to these existing epistemes?
Yeah. Essentially, because I think the dominant episteme which international relations or strategic studies as discipline followed was of realism, right? It was very convenient, it was very embedded, it was very essentialized and naturalized. So whatever we adopted as a foreign construct, as a foreign episteme, was of realism, for understanding our contextuality, for strategic studies, for strategic narrative, for security policies. So it's 100%. I mean, something has dominated from the outside, and it has to be. This is the time when it really needs to be changed. After 1990s, I think, after the end of Cold War, contextuality is more of relevance, and the theory of international relations and strategic studies also took a turn towards contextuality. But somehow, in the middle, it also became affected by another dominant discourse of neoliberalism. So institutionalism and then liberal economy. I think it replaced realism. It did not bring a sufficient change, which could actually help us, bring us our own context.
Right, so I think this was a really interesting discussion that we had, and to my mind it definitely merits more exploration and more debate, because I think as a concept in general we really need to understand where this is coming from. Like we said in the beginning, this is not something that's generally part of your mainstream discussions. Essentially, to my mind, based on also on what you've said and also what we've experienced in the last months in our discussions during that, in our debates during that conference as well, it would be important to start discussing this with greater frequency and also with more input and more diversity of thought within our classrooms as well. That would essentially be a starting point, because in order to even consider the idea of challenging or changing epistemes or bringing or indigenizing epistemes, the first step would be for us to really understand what it involves, what it means, and how we can best capacitate ourselves to do that. So perhaps we'll take this up in another podcast as well. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ma'am Aisha Malik, and we look forward to hosting you again. Thank you.
Thank you.